All right, well, starting October 1st, two drugs used for both pardon me, abortion and severe bleeding after birth will become controlled dangerous substances. Sophia Ridley spoke to a doctor about how that could impact women's health.
The drugs misoprostol and mifepristone have multiple uses, including inducing an abortion or helping with severe bleeding after birth.
If you're using it in an emergency situation, it needs to be readily available. And, drugs that you have to get from the pharmacy, like any drug, it can be a long wait or the pharmacy doesn't have it.
Starting October 1st in Louisiana, those drugs will be classified as a controlled dangerous substance and must be obtained with a prescription. Dr. Dunn says that going through a pharmacy wastes valuable time.
The CDC just came out with a big recommendation about how much pain women are having with IUDs, and we need to do as much as we can to minimize the pain. And the misoprostol is great to help the cervix dilate, making it easier to put the IUD in.
The author of the law says the drugs should still be available on medical carts.
I know there are carts that have authorization on them directly that can be overridden at any time that have scheduled drugs in those carts. That's exactly what we expect to be used. I believe LDH is going to put out more rules on that.
Senator Thomas Presley pushed for the law after his pregnant sister was poisoned with misoprostol 7 different times by her former husband.
We're simply saying that it needs to be prescribed and administered by a healthcare professional so that these drugs are not in the hands of bad actors like my brother-in-law.
The first vice chair of the Louisiana Democratic Party says she lost a friend due to postpartum hemorrhaging. She believes this law restricts doctors and patients' resources, making it dangerous.
The framing of the bill was designed to keep women safe. But the folks that authored and passed the bill didn't listen to healthcare professionals when passing the bill, who said this will cause more harm, not less.
Part of the bill makes it a crime if an abortion is coerced by means of fraud. That means if a person knowingly and intentionally gives a pregnant woman an abortion-inducing drug without her knowledge or consent, it can result in some serious jail time and fines.
If this occurs in the first trimester, the person that commits this act on a woman would be sentenced to 10 years of incarceration. And if it happens in the second or third trimester, because of the increased risk to the woman, the penalty would increase to 20 years.
Republicans believe this law is protecting women, whereas Democrats believe it's restricting their health care options. In Monroe, Sophia Ridley, KNOE 8 News.